A man lies motionless on the sand, his back propped against a crumbling seawall. His posture is almost too peaceful, legs stretched out, one crossed neatly over the other, arms by his sides, shoes polished like he was headed to a dance rather than death. He's sharply dressed, brown trousers, a white shirt with a tie, a knit pullover, a perfectly pressed coat. Everything about him suggests dignity, control. But this picture of composure begins to crumble the moment the police arrive. No wallet, no money, no identification, not even a label on his clothes. Every tag has been deliberately removed. The name of the man? Unknown. His reason for being there? A complete mystery. And then there's this, tucked inside a tiny, hard-to-spot fob pocket sewn into the waistband of his pants, a torn scrap of paper. One phrase printed in a delicate flowing script. Tamam shud. 2 words. Persian. They translate to "it is finished." That small fragment of text? It would ignite one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in Australia's history, and one of the strangest true crime cases the world has ever seen. Who was this man? How did he die? And perhaps more importantly, what was he trying to tell us? Behind him, an undeciphered code, cryptic as it is chilling, scrawled in the back of a rare book. A nurse with a secret. An entire investigation that went cold until decades later, when DNA evidence rose from the grave with an answer. Or did it? Tonight, we go deep. We revisit a mystery that has haunted generations and continues to baffle codebreakers, detectives, and historians alike. This is the story of the Somerton Man case. And by the time we're done, you'll know why this forgotten man on a quiet Australian beach might just be the most mysterious corpse in modern history. Because while the case may be over 70 years old, one thing's for sure. It's far from finished. The date is November 30th, 1948. Adelaide, South Australia. A city trying to reclaim its rhythm in the uneasy quiet of a post-war world. The streets are calmer now. The echo of marching boots has faded. The flags have come down. But beneath the surface, the scars of global conflict still linger, visible in tired eyes, rationed pantries, and a pervasive sense that not all secrets died with the war. The sun begins its slow descent over Somerton Beach, casting a warm orange glow across the sand and sea. It's a peaceful evening. Children play. Waves roll in with rhythmic ease. And on the edge of it all, slumped against a stone seawall, just beyond the reach of the tide, a man appears to be resting. He doesn't draw much attention at first. 2 young couples, strolling by, think little of him. One of them, John Lyons, notes that the man hasn't moved in quite some time. But it's warm, and the pose, while strange, isn't alarming. Maybe he's drunk. Maybe he's just asleep. The group walks on, leaving the man to his solitude. But when the sun rises the next morning, he's still there. Same spot, same position, same silence. This time, it's not a couple, but a local horseman who takes notice. He approaches, curious. What he finds sends a chill through his spine. The man isn't sleeping. His skin is pale, cold. Rigor mortis has already set in. Police are called. A crowd gathers. And within hours, Adelaide's peaceful beach has transformed into the center of a growing enigma. They check his pulse. Nothing. Examine the body. No visible wounds. No blood. Just a clean, well-dressed stranger who has somehow died without struggle or sign. His face looks peaceful. Almost too peaceful. But death is rarely this quiet. The body is taken in for examination. No one comes forward to claim him. No one recognizes the face. There are no fingerprints in any Australian database. His dental records match no one. He's a ghost. A man with no past. But soon, investigators would discover that while he might have died without identification, he left behind something far stranger and far more disturbing. In a city still licking the wounds of war, still nursing its trust back to health, the Somerton Man had just opened a wound of his own, one no doctor or detective would be able to stitch shut for decades to come. And it all started with a body on the beach. When authorities examined the body, what they found wasn't alarming. It was unnerving. This man, this nameless, lifeless stranger, was dressed with such care it was almost ceremonial. He wore a crisp white shirt, a thin red tie neatly knotted at the throat, a finely knit brown pullover under a sharply tailored jacket. His trousers were pressed with precision. His shoes, polished to a mirror shine, bore not a single scuff. And yet something was off. Every single clothing label had been removed. Not cut hastily, not torn, but meticulously snipped away. No brand names. No store tags. No manufacturer marks. It was as if someone had intentionally erased every trace of where this man came from. Why? The mystery only deepened when police turned out his pockets. They found a used bus ticket from Adelaide to Glenelg and an unused train ticket from the same route. That meant he may have changed his mind, or was following someone, or being followed. There was a pack of chewing gum, a comb, a half-empty box of matches, a folded packet of Army Club cigarettes, but oddly, the brand inside didn't match the box. They were Kensitas. A cigarette was perched loosely behind his ear. Another, half-smoked, lay balanced on his collarbone, as though it had fallen from his lips the moment life left his body. No wallet, no money, no form of identification of any kind. This was no accident. This man had not simply wandered here and died. It was deliberate. And while there were no bruises or blood, no wounds or obvious trauma, the absence of violence only made the scene more ominous. This wasn't a mugging. This wasn't a fight. If anything, it felt staged. The body was taken to the city morgue, and that's where the questions turned darker. The autopsy revealed something startling. His organs were congested. His spleen was 3 times its normal size. His stomach and liver were swollen, filled with blood. But there were no foreign substances, no trace of any known poison, no needle marks, no bruises on the body. The pathologist, John Cleland, described the findings as peculiar. Everything pointed to some kind of poisoning, but whatever toxin had been used was either incredibly rare, undetectable, or expertly administered to vanish without a trace. Some suggested digitalis, a cardiac poison known to cause sudden death. Others whispered about rare substances only government agents or military personnel would have access to, compounds that kill quickly and disappear faster. But nothing could be proven. No substance could be identified. He had died, it seemed, with a secret clenched so tightly in his chest that not even science could pry it loose. And yet, in the quiet of that sterile examination room, the mystery had only just begun. Because while the Somerton Man's body was a puzzle in itself, it was the objects he didn't carry, the ones he'd left behind or hidden, that would send this case spinning into the realms of espionage, coded messages, and Cold War conspiracies. Days after the man was found, as investigators combed through his belongings again and again, looking for even the smallest sliver of a lead, they made a quiet, unsettling discovery. Inside a small, nearly invisible fob pocket sewn into the waistband of his trousers was a tightly rolled scrap of paper, folded with precision, almost ritualistically. 2 words, printed in elegant, serif font. Tamam Shud. Translated from Persian, it means ended, or finished. At first glance, it could be mistaken for a poetic flourish, a dramatic way to mark the end of a life. But this wasn't the man's suicide note, at least not in the traditional sense. This scrap had been torn, deliberately. Its jagged edge suggested it was cut from something else, something larger. That something wouldn't be discovered until weeks later, when a man came forward with a strange story of his own. He'd parked his car on a street not far from Somerton Beach. On the back seat, under an old coat, he found a small, forgotten book, a slim volume of poetry. The Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, an English translation of an ancient Persian text, rich in themes of fate, mortality, and the ephemeral nature of life. At the back of the book, 1 page had been torn out, exactly where those 2 haunting words had once been printed. Tamam Shud. It was a perfect match. But that wasn't all. Scrawled faintly on the rear cover of the book, nearly invisible without UV light, was a series of letters, arranged in lines, like verse. But these weren't words. They weren't even complete sentences. They looked like gibberish at first glance. Yet to trained eyes, they resembled something far more chilling, a cipher. Here's what it read. Vgobabt, Mliawi, Tbimpinit, Mliaboayak, Itn Samskab. 5 cryptic lines. Random seeming letters. No key. No obvious pattern. But anyone who's studied espionage, wartime intelligence, or military operations knows. This is how coded messages are hidden. Disguised in plain sight. In books. In letters. On the backs of seemingly innocent items. Immediately, speculation erupted. Was this man a spy? Had he left this code as a final message? Was it meant for someone else, or meant to be buried with him? At the height of a Cold War, such suspicions weren't paranoid. They were practical. Australia was quietly bracing against Soviet infiltration. Intelligence officers operated in the shadows. Information was currency. And silence? Silence was survival. Perhaps this man had chosen his silence. Or perhaps someone else chose it for him. What if the Somerton Man hadn't come to that beach to die? What if he'd come to deliver something? A message, a warning, a final truth. And instead, he was silenced before he could speak. The torn scrap of poetry, the hidden code, the missing identity, all of it pointed to a truth more disturbing than any simple case of suicide or misadventure. This was no ordinary death. This was a performance, carefully staged, purposefully obscured. And as the press got wind of the story, the public began asking the same chilling question. Had a spy died in plain sight, right under their noses? For decades, the message found in the back of the Rubaiyat has taunted linguists, codebreakers, and intelligence experts alike. 5 lines, 23 words, if you could even call them that. Vgobabt, Mliawi, Tbimpinit, Mliaboayak, Itn Samskab. No punctuation, no context, no clear repetition. Just an eerie silence behind each line, as if daring the reader to find meaning in the chaos. And people tried. Oh, did they try? Professionals and hobbyists alike threw themselves into the cipher with the tenacity of wartime cryptographers. But unlike the German Enigma or even Zodiac's cryptograms, this one didn't give. One theory emerged early, that this was a Hill cipher, a method developed in the 1920s that transforms letters into numbers, then manipulates them using linear algebra. This approach is so mathematically dense, it's rarely used outside serious espionage, implying the author or the intended recipient would have needed specialized knowledge to decode it. Some even claim to find fragments of possible phrases within. Mo Mobson SOE Leo IVI, interpreted by one code enthusiast as a jumbled reference to the Special Operations Executive, or SOE, a British World War II espionage unit often described as Churchill's secret army. Could the Somerton Man have been SOE? Had his death been part of a covert intelligence operation gone wrong? Or right? Still, others thought less dramatically. Perhaps the lines weren't a code at all, but rather acrostics, the first letters of a poem or message. Like a shorthand only the author could reconstruct. One theory proposed that the letters corresponded to the names of racehorses, a popular pastime in mid-century Australia. If decoded correctly, it might even have revealed a pattern in betting slips or train routes. One particularly inventive cryptanalyst on Medium proposed it could be a mixture of phonetic spelling, poetic fragments, and personal shorthand, a sort of journal entry from a man who either didn't expect to be found or desperately hoped he would. But if he wanted to be understood, why go to such great lengths to be unreadable? Despite intense scrutiny from cryptographers at top universities and even the Australian Navy's own code division, no one has cracked it. Not in over 70 years. There were no reference books to align with, no key, no Rosetta Stone, just the letters and the silence. And here's where the story gets darker still. Some theorists believe that was the point, that the code is unsolvable, not because it was complex, but because it was never meant to be solved. It was a message for one set of eyes, a signal meant for delivery or destruction. The cipher, then, may not be a mystery with a missing answer, but a warning whose purpose we were never meant to understand. Whatever its truth, it cemented the Somerton Man as something more than a tragic stranger. He became a riddle, a whisper from a shadowed world that brushed close to our own, just long enough to leave behind a trace, then vanish forever. The code still exists, unbroken, untamed, and unless someone somewhere holds a secret yet to be revealed, it may remain that way for eternity. To understand how the Somerton Man became more than a body, more than a cipher, more than a lost name in the sand, we have to understand the era. The year was 1948. The war was over, technically, but the world was anything but at peace. Across Europe, iron curtains were being drawn. Allies had become adversaries. The US and the Soviet Union, once united against fascism, were now locked in a simmering ideological battle that would become known as the Cold War. Every embassy was a listening post, every diplomat a potential spy, and every death a possible cover story. Australia, distant though it was, had become a crucial player in this shadow conflict. Its geographic proximity to Southeast Asia made it an invaluable hub for Western intelligence operations. Secret communication bases dotted the coastline. Surveillance outposts fed information back to MI6, to the CIA, to the newly formed ASIO, Australia's domestic spy agency. So when a well-dressed stranger dies mysteriously on a beach, with no ID, no labels, and a possible cipher hidden in a book, people began to ask not what happened, but who he was, and why. That book, the Rubaiyat, it wasn't just any copy. It was an incredibly rare edition, one nearly impossible to find. And in the front of that very book, investigators discovered a telephone number, written faintly, almost missed. It belonged to a woman named Jo Thompson. She lived just a short distance from where the body was found. A nurse by profession, lived alone with her young son. Her connection to the case? Circumstantial at first. When police visited her, she appeared composed but wary. When they showed her the book and the fragment of the poem, she visibly tensed. When she was later shown a plaster cast of the man's face, his features carefully preserved in a death mask, she reportedly nearly fainted. She said she didn't know him, had never seen him before, but investigators weren't convinced. Further digging revealed she had once given a copy of the Rubaiyat to a man named Alfred Boxall, another military officer during the war. For a brief moment, authorities believed they had cracked the case. Perhaps Boxall was the Somerton Man. But then Boxall turned up, very much alive, very much unharmed, and still in possession of his copy of the book, with Joe's inscription still written inside. The Somerton Man's copy had no such note. It had only the code. So, who was he? Was he another wartime acquaintance of Joe's? A rejected lover? A betrayed ally? Or something else entirely? Theories spun fast. Some claimed Jo Thompson had ties to the Soviet Union, that she'd been recruited during or after the war as a low-level operative. Her nursing background would have made her a prime target for espionage recruitment. Access to medical knowledge, anatomical training, and discretion. Others went further, suggesting the Somerton Man was her contact, that he came to Adelaide on assignment, that something went wrong, a plan derailed, a mission compromised. Was the message he carried meant for her? Was his death an act of retribution? A silencing? Jo never admitted to knowing him. She died in 2007, taking whatever truth she held to the grave. But her story and her reaction to that cast of the Somerton Man remains one of the most haunting elements of the entire case. Because for all the evidence, all the theories, all the shadows, there's something about her reaction, that flinch, that breathless moment, that instinctive fear. It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't planned. It was human. And in that brief flicker of emotion, perhaps we saw the only glimpse of truth this case has ever given us. As decades passed, the case of the Somerton Man drifted into legend. Official leads ran cold. Witnesses grew old. The detectives who once walked the shores of Somerton Beach, files under arm, faded from memory alongside the very man they were trying to identify. But in mystery, silence is never permanent. There are always those who can't look away. What the authorities set aside, the obsessed picked up. One of the earliest modern torchbearers of the case was Nick Pelling. a British historian and cryptologist known for his work on ancient and unsolved codes. On his blog Cipher Mysteries, Pelling revisited the Somerton cipher with the tenacity of someone who'd been born for the task. He cataloged every line, every theory, every microscopic anomaly. To Pelling, the case wasn't just about a dead man, it was about a language left behind, one that begged to be translated. Pelling's analysis brought fresh eyes to an old ghost. He introduced the mystery to a new generation of digital sleuths. Reddit users, code hobbyists, linguists, even AI programmers, all determined to do what the Navy, the police, and the universities couldn't. But the case would take a radical turn in 2009. Enter Derek Abbott, a professor of electrical engineering at the University of Adelaide. Abbott didn't just want to crack the code. He wanted to resurrect the man. With a background in physics, engineering, and statistics, Abbott approached the Somerton case with a meticulous mind and a stubborn heart. What started as curiosity soon became a mission, a decade-long obsession to give the man on the beach a name. He worked through every available record, tracked down living descendants of those potentially connected to the case, analyzed the rubaiyat, the body, the death mask. But Abbott's greatest breakthrough wouldn't come from books or badges. It came from DNA. Working with forensic genealogists, Abbott obtained hair samples taken decades earlier from the plaster cast of the Somerton Man's head. By 2018, advancements in genetic technology allowed for the extraction of usable mitochondrial DNA. From there, the team began building a family tree. Line by line, leaf by leaf, thousands of possible relatives narrowed down by cross-referencing records, matching genetic markers, and applying statistical models so precise they'd make a Vegas oddsmaker nervous. This was genealogy as warfare. And in 2022, over 70 years after the man died on the beach, Derek Abbott announced something stunning. He had a name: Carl Charles Webb, an electrical engineer, born in Melbourne in 1905. A man with a quiet life, a failed marriage, and a possible history of mental illness. No record of his death. No trace after the 1940s. On paper, he fit. The timeline matched. The facial structure aligned. Even the rare dental patterns were consistent. It was, to many, the breakthrough the world had been waiting for. But even as the mystery of who seemed to be solved, the mystery of why remained untouched. Because Webb, too, had no known ties to espionage, no record of travel to Adelaide, no apparent reason to write a cipher, no motive, no message. Unless, of course, that's exactly what he wanted. Meanwhile, efforts to decode the cipher continued. Academics ran statistical analyses, letter frequency distributions, pattern recognition models. No consistent key emerged. Some concluded the text lacked the mathematical complexity of a true cipher, suggesting it might be gibberish. Or worse, bait. A red herring left to mislead anyone who followed. But others insisted that if a man goes to such great lengths to erase his identity, plant a message, and die anonymously, there has to be meaning in the madness. And maybe, just maybe, the cipher still holds a key, not to the man's name, but to his story. For over 70 years, the Somerton Man lay buried in a quiet cemetery in Adelaide, South Australia. His headstone bore no name, only the words, "Here lies the unknown man who was found at Somerton Beach." But in May of 2021, that silence was broken. With the careful approval of state authorities, forensic teams gathered to exhume the body. The scene was somber, almost reverent. It wasn't a criminal investigation now. It was an act of restoration, of trying at last to give this man something that had been denied him since the day he died: an identity. Soil was sifted, the remains lifted with precision. Every fragment was logged, protected, and transported to a secure lab for analysis. What they hoped for wasn't easy. 70 years of decay, humidity, and chemical leaching made viable DNA extraction a difficult task. But science, it seems, had finally caught up with the mystery. There was still one more place to look, an unusual place: the death mask. Back in 1949, not long after the autopsy, authorities had made a full plaster cast of the man's head and upper torso, a common practice at the time for unidentified persons. From that cast, preserved in near-perfect condition, forensic specialists had earlier plucked a few stray strands of hair, embedded in the wax used to prepare the mask. Those strands held something precious, mitochondrial DNA, a maternal lineage, a thread. It wasn't enough to sequence a full profile, but it was enough to begin reverse engineering a family tree. Derek Abbott, still spearheading the investigation, partnered with Colleen Fitzpatrick, a leading American forensic genealogist. Their task was daunting: to search through thousands of potential matches in massive online databases, tracking down connections, building branches, identifying crossovers. It took years, endless nights, dead ends, hopes rising and falling like tides. But then, on July 26, 2022, the breakthrough came. They had a name: Carl Charles Webb. Born November 16, 1905, in Footscray, a working-class suburb of Melbourne. He was an electrical engineer by trade, a quiet man, the youngest of 6 children, married to a woman named Dorothy, whom he had separated from in the mid-1940s. After that, he simply disappeared. No death certificate, no grave, no known employment, no children. Just a blank space in history where a life should have been. Carl Webb had a brother, Roy, who had tragically died as a prisoner of war during World War II, a loss that reportedly shook the family to its core. Neighbors and distant relatives recalled mental health struggles, reclusiveness, and a growing sense that Carl, once an aspiring inventor, had quietly unraveled after the war. No one reported him missing. No one came looking. In the shadows of a new Cold War, amid the birth of atomic fear and spy games, Carl Webb had vanished into history until now. But here's where the story tempers its triumph with caution. Authorities, while intrigued, have not formally confirmed the identity. The evidence, though strong, is circumstantial by forensic standards. The DNA doesn't match any living descendants directly, only inferred relatives. There's no physical document tying Carl Webb to Adelaide, no travel logs, no hotel check-ins, just a genetic match, a compelling theory, and the eerie alignment of dates, habits, and circumstances. Even Derek Abbott, after over a decade of relentless work, remains cautiously optimistic. The Somerton Man may be Carl Webb, but that only answers one question, and it leaves the most haunting ones untouched. What was he doing in Adelaide? Was he trying to find someone? Flee someone? Deliver something? And why, in the final moments of his life, did he carry a single torn line of poetry in his pocket that whispered, "It is finished"? So who was Carl Webb? And what path led him to Somerton Beach, dressed in silence, wrapped in riddles? Born on November 16, 1905, in Footscray, a suburb on the gritty industrial fringe of Melbourne, Carl was the youngest of 6 children. His family was modest, working class, practical. His father worked with railways. His siblings carved out lives as tradesmen, homemakers, and laborers. Carl, though, stood slightly apart. He had a curious mind. In his younger years, Carl Webb trained and worked as an electrical engineer. He was intelligent, analytical, the kind of man who could pull apart a radio and put it back together in better shape than when he started. He wrote verses. He scribbled ideas. He dabbled in poetry, mathematics, and puzzles. But while his intellect shone, his life began to dim. At some point during the 1930s or early 1940s, Carl married a woman named Dorothy Jean Robertson, known as Doff. Their relationship was complicated, perhaps even strained from the start. Over time, it soured. They had no children. And in the mid-1940s, Dorothy left him. She filed for a maintenance order. She wanted support, and Carl simply vanished. He never responded, never showed up in court, never paid. By 1947, Dorothy had filed again, this time requesting that the court deem her husband's whereabouts unknown. And from that moment, Carl Webb effectively became a ghost. But life hadn't just dealt him divorce. It had also dealt him grief. Carl's brother, Roy Webb, died during the Second World War, taken as a prisoner of war. The trauma of that loss seems to have affected Carl deeply. Roy wasn't just a sibling. He was a fixture of stability, a link to something stronger, more grounded. When Roy died, a piece of Carl unraveled with him. His mental health reportedly deteriorated. He became withdrawn, unpredictable, a man not so much fading from life as walking away from it, one quiet step at a time. By 1948, there's no trace of him in any official record, until a man matching Carl's physical characteristics, age, height, dental structure, washes up dead on Somerton Beach, carrying no identification, no belongings, and a scrap of Persian poetry that reads, "Tamam shud. It is finished." A suicide? It's possible. The medical examiner believed poisoning was likely. A rare toxin, possibly digitalis or strophanthine, substances that kill quickly and vanish just as fast, leaving little behind in the bloodstream. If it was suicide, it was staged with poetic precision. The clean suit, the removed labels, the tickets to nowhere, the cigarette burned halfway down, the strange, cold quiet of death made to look like sleep. Some speculate Carl came to Adelaide with a purpose, to find someone, to deliver something, to disappear by design. Others believe his journey was internal, that this was a final act of symbolism from a man who saw himself as a character in a tragedy of his own making. Perhaps the book, The Rubaiyat, wasn't a code at all, but a mirror, a way to mark the moment when life had slipped past the point of return. A farewell in someone else's words because his own had failed him. What we do know is that Carl Webb, if he is indeed the Somerton Man, was a man broken in private, not by war, not by espionage, but by the quieter devastations, the death of a brother, the loss of love, the slow erosion of hope. And if he did choose that beach as his stage, if that final scrap of paper was his closing line, then the tragedy of Carl Webb isn't just that he died unknown. It's that he may have wanted it that way. So here we are, nearly 2 hours later, decades of investigation behind us, names uncovered, lives dissected, clues dragged into the light after more than 70 years in the dark. And yet, what lingers is not clarity, it's absence. Because for everything we now think we know, so much remains unanswered. The code, those 5 haunting lines scrawled in the back of the Rubaiyat, has still never been cracked. No cipher has been proven, no translation confirmed. No one knows who the message was for or what it meant. Was it a farewell? A warning? A call sign? A poem? Or was it never meant to be solved at all? And then there's Jo Thompson. Her number was in the book. Her home just a stone's throw from where the body was found. She reacted with such visceral emotion when shown the man's face, but swore she'd never seen him before. If Carl Webb was the Somerton Man, how did he know Jo? Did he come searching for her? Did they once share something secret, something forbidden? Did she recognize the man, or did she recognize the consequences of admitting that she did? We'll never know. She carried that truth with her to the grave. And so we're left standing at the crossroads of 2 narratives. Was this the quiet, poetic end of a broken man, a personal tragedy so intimate it dressed itself in metaphor? Or was it a tale of espionage, of agents and ciphers, and whispered messages passed under the cover of war? Was the Somerton Man a failed lover, a man in crisis, or a messenger who was silenced before he could speak? Each theory, each detail adds a new layer, but never the full picture. And that, perhaps, is what makes the story endure. The Somerton Man is not just a mystery. He's a mirror, reflecting our deepest fears, our wildest theories, our fascination with the unknown. He is a man lost to time, but etched permanently in its shadow. Even now, new breakthroughs could be coming. New DNA technologies, new genealogical links, a codebreaker who sees something others missed. The answers may still be out there. And this case? It's far from finished. If you want to be here the moment the next piece of the puzzle falls into place, if you want to know who he truly was, and why he died with poetry in his pocket, then stay with us. Subscribe, follow the clues, and help us tell the story of a man who refused to be forgotten. Because mysteries this powerful don't stay buried forever. So what do we know? We likely know his name, Carl Webb, the quiet, gifted man from Melbourne who disappeared into history only to re-emerge decades later on a beach with a poem in his pocket. But that's where certainty ends. Because his motive? Still unknown. The cipher? Still unreadable. The connection to Joe Thompson? Still tangled in silence. Was Carl a man trying to vanish? Or someone trying to be found? We don't have those answers. Not yet. But maybe, just maybe, you do. Drop your theory in the comments. Was it suicide cloaked in symbolism? A Cold War hit? A love affair turned tragic? We read every single one, and some of the sharpest insights have come not from experts, but from you. And if you thought this case was wild, wait until you see what science is solving next. In our upcoming video, we'll dive into the top 5 cold cases cracked by genetic genealogy. Stories where DNA reached across time, pulling justice out of history's shadows. So make sure you're subscribed. Turn on notifications, because the truth is out there, and we're not done looking.